This playlist will collect together and organize the individual component modules, which together will comprise our first lecture on identity theory in the philosophy of mind. This lecture will focus on type identity theory of the variety espoused by Place, Feigl, and Smart. The lecture will have 4 acts. We'll begin by recapping logical behaviorism's semantic reduction. We'll talk about its motivations, its methodologies, and the criticisms that it faced. In our second act, we'll turn from logical behaviorism to discuss the type identity theory of Place, Feigl, and Smart. We'll see that they shift from meaning equivalence and analytic reduction to co-reference and a reduction of synthetic identification. That is, an identification based upon empirical discoveries and not one of subsumption through meaning equivalence. After discussing their view, we'll look at 3 arguments that they seem to offer for type identity theory. In our fourth and final act, we'll consider 3 arguments that one might offer against type identity theory. So let's turn to our recap of logical behaviorism. Recall that I took great pains to emphasize the tremendous advances that occurred at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century across a wide swath of the physical sciences, as well as mathematics and logic. These, together with the results of memory researchers like Ebbinghaus and the systematic research on classical and operant conditioning by behaviorist psychologists, really creates a sort of gestalt shift for some philosophers. For these theorists, monistic physicalism has already begun to fulfill its promise. Its success renders the question of its potential moot in their eyes, and hence arguments trying to establish its superior potential compared to oppositional dualism, they don't seem to matter anymore. The project for philosophers like the logical empiricists and Gilbert Ryle, then, shifts from one of showing monistic physicalism's superior promise to one of explaining its successes and arguing that it captures what is most important in our ordinary ways of thinking and talking about the mind. Specifically, these philosophers now want to address in a substantive way the problem of physical categorization and mechanisms, and they want to do this through some variation on semantic reduction. Indeed, whether you're a logical behaviorist of the Rileyan stripe or you're a logical behaviorist of the empiricist stripe, you both want to claim that our temptation to countenance oppositional substance-mind-body dualism in fact stems from a colossal misunderstanding of our own mental lexicon. In the case of the empiricists, this gets cashed out through their wielding of the verificationist theory of meaning in a 2-pronged strategy. The first prong consists in denying that many aspects of ordinary talk about the mind are in fact meaningful at all. For instance, one could never verify the dualist talk of spatially unextended substance. Hence, such dualist claims fail the test for meaningfulness and amount to nothing more than mere poetry. In a similar fashion, Ryle will claim, as a lexical cartographer, that we have lost our way in ordinary usage. We, in effect, have got our lexical maps upside down. The second prong of the logical empiricist approach is again to wield that verificationist criterion of meaning. Here, we use the criterion of meaning to adopt overt behavior as the only means to verify the posits for our ordinary talk about the mind. For instance, Hempel will tell us that Paul has a toothache gets its meaning from the physical test sentences that describe how we might verify this claim. Statements like, ask the question, what is the matter? Paul utters the words, I have a toothache. In response to logical behaviorism, however, theorists like Putnam and Chisholm push back against this idea that overt behavioral criteria exhaust the meanings of mental terms. And we find in Brains and Behavior that Putnam adopts a direct reference theory for mental terms according to which the reference of mental terms such as pain consists at least in part of the mental state itself, regardless of its typical causes and effects. In other words, some mental state terms seem to get their meaning, at least in large part, from their intrinsic qualitative nature. As a result, theorists like Place and Feigl adopt an alternative reference-based approach.